This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy.
You'll see him in your nightmares, you'll see him in your dreams. He'll appear out of nowhere, but he ain't what he seems. You'll see him in your head on the TV screen. Hey buddy, I'm warning you to turn it off. He's a ghost, he's a god, he's a man, he's a guru. You're one microscopic cog in his catastrophic plan, designed and directed by his red right hand.
Welcome back everyone to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. I'm Tony Black, your host, and this is part 2 of our special first 2-part episode of the X-Files, and this time we are talking Ascension. Ascending to the stars. On repeat. Ascending to the stars. That's going to get annoying fast. So, I'm joined again by Darren Mooney.
Pleasure to be here. I'm a bit disappointed that the X-Cast didn't open with Chris Carter announcing previously on the X-Cast.
Well, maybe we did. But yeah, this is the first 2-parter, so we're going to crack straight on into talking in more depth about the 6th episode of Season 2, Ascension. Ascension is the 6th episode of the 2nd season of The X-Files. It first aired on October the 21st, 1994, was written by Paul Brown and directed by Michael Lang. In this episode, after Scully is abducted by the escaped mental patient Dwayne Barry, Mulder embarks on a desperate search to find her before she disappears forever.
According to the reports I've reviewed, Agent Scully's research states that Dwayne Barry's propensity for violent, deviant behavior is due to brain damage from a bullet wound in the head. Is this the operational opinion?
Yes, sir.
Is there another?
He's convinced he's going to be abducted by aliens. That by taking someone to the abduction site, he won't be abducted himself.
That he's following orders from alien voices in his head.
Yes.
Well, that's an interesting spin on the Nuremberg defense. Which explanation do you subscribe to, Agent Mulder?
There's a question of how he could have gotten to her in the first place.
And you think these alien voices told him?
Agent Scully was carrying a small piece of metal that was removed from Dwayne Barry's abdomen. An implant he described as a tracking device.
Agent Scully thought that you had made a major miscalculation in Dwayne Barry's psychosis. Is that true?
Yes, but that still doesn't explain how he could have found her.
Where would he be taking her?
I don't know. He talked about a mountain, but he wasn't specific about the location.
Well, however he got to her and whatever his motives, he took Agent Scully's car and her weapon. I think we all understand the seriousness of this matter and should proceed ahead quickly with all possible resources. I need you to turn over your files to HRT.
I'd like to brief them myself, sir.
Go home, Agent Mulder. You've been up all night. Get some sleep.
Sir, I know Dwayne Barry. I've been in his head. I know how he
You're
thinks.
too close to this case. If we can use you, we will.
Sir.
That's an order, Agent Mulder.
So Darren, out of 10, what would you give Ascension?
I'd go with a 7, and it would be a low 7.
Oh, well then. That's interesting. Why would you give it a low 7? One of the most famous episodes of The X-Files.
It is. It's. I think we sort of alluded to this when we talked about Dwayne Barry, where it was like, I have some issues with the 2-parter that are a lot less obvious in Dwayne Barry than they are in Ascension. The first thing is that it is quite well produced, and the reason that it gets above 5 is primarily for like the Roger Moore sequence on the trolley, which we'll get to later on. But
it is very Roger Moore. That's true.
In the best possible way that a scene can be Roger Moore, to be fair. But I do have some issues. The abduction arc is responsible for pretty much everything that happens in the show after this point. So it's hard to be too critical of it, because if it didn't happen, we wouldn't have the mythology, and the mythology is a large part of what everybody loves about the show. Even the people who now complain about the mythology, at the show's peak, they were the ones who were following every detail and sort of loving all these big, epic, blockbuster episodes. And I still do love them. But there's a but coming in here. And again,
a huge but.
It's not necessarily a huge but, and I cannot lie. But I do think that there are some issues with how the production team chose to work with Gillian Anderson's absence. Now, acknowledging that there was no way around the absence and that they had to come up with something, I still think that they were maybe not entirely prepared to deal with the repercussions of the abduction arc immediately. Like, I think that it was very much improvised, and there are ways in which it feels very, very improvised, in that the abduction arc, as it appears in Duane Barry in Ascension, is very much cast as Mulder's story rather than Scully's story. It's about Scully being abducted so Mulder can feel really bad about it and run after her and chase her. And it's something that One Breath sort of rectifies, and it's what I love about One Breath. But then across the rest of the second season, you have this sort of this awkwardness about how to deal with Scully's abduction, about how to work through it, about how to confront it. And the show sort of goes through a number of different ways of doing it before it gets to an episode that sort of deals with it, which is Irresistible. But throughout the second season, there's a sense that the production staff never really thought about how this arc works for Scully as a character. It's all driven by how it happens for Mulder. And Scully is very much sort of reduced to a pawn who is taken away from Mulder to hurt him. Like, the cigarette-smoking man doesn't seem to remove Scully because she's a threat to the conspiracy. He removes her because she enables Mulder, and because he can't hurt Mulder directly for reasons that are somewhat ambiguous when he can hurt Scully directly. And I think that the show doesn't quite get that this is sort of a very tired and very sort of... It's a trope that makes me a little bit uncomfortable when I see it used so regularly. The hurt the female lead to hurt the male lead indirectly. And I think the show does a wonderful job in the third season. I really, really loved the third season for finding a way to take that and make it Scully's story, and to turn it into a story that is about her and that invests her with agency. But I think at the point where they do it, which is these 2 episodes here, I don't think that they get away with that. And again, I should be clear, I gave it a 6 out of 10, which is still above average, which is still a good episode, if not as great as I think everybody thinks it is. I suspect you ranked it higher.
Only marginally. I think I was going to say a 7.5, because I think you're absolutely right, really. And when you say, in season 3 they do focus it more on Scully, they do correct. They do correct it. I was going to say to some of the damage, but I don't necessarily think damage was done. I think it was a necessary choice given the problem of Gillian Anderson's pregnancy, and there were other ways they could have done this. Obviously, they could have just had Scully. In a lot of other shows, Scully would just have gone out for a few weeks and just been on vacation or something, and Mulder would just...
Scully's at a conference and Krycek is our replacement, or we have a rotating guest partner of the week.
Absolutely.
If the show were famous enough, you'd have like celebrity guest partner Lawrence Fishburne or something.
Yeah. And it would have maybe been Mulder, pairing up with a random, civilian who's involved in the case. Something. You're probably a female sometimes.
We had the script. We just sort of pasted over the name Scully with whoever our guest star is this week.
Yeah. A simpler show and a less ambitious show could have done that. But what Chris Carter tries to do with this 2-parter is really change the game up a bit and allow... And throughout the, because obviously they knew they were going... As soon as they came back from season 2 and they knew Gillian Anderson was pregnant, they crafted this little mini arc with the X-Files being shut down, and then how they would bring the X-Files back. And it is a brave choice.
It is a brave choice, and I should say that the episodes are mainly phenomenal. Like it's telling that the first dud that you hit in the second season, at the risk of spoiling some things, is basically the episode after they've reached the end of that little arc. And I think that speaks to how well constructed it is. And it is very, very, like, I would argue that a lot of the reason why people love the second season, why the second season is so well regarded, is down to the strength at which it opens. It comes out of the gate phenomenally strong. And it is, as you said, it is bold. It is unprecedented, or, very close to unprecedented in the context of early 90s television to have something like this.
Yeah.
And I think that, yes, you have to acknowledge that. And if they didn't do this, the show would not be anything like the show that it ended up being. The risk that they took here, that they were forced to take here, ended up defining the show and turning it into the show that I think I love, you love, and I think everybody listening to it loves.
I think it's more than a fair point, that. I really do. I think the reason that Ascension isn't as good as Dwayne Barry is simply for the fact that it's classic Part 2 syndrome. Dwayne Barry establishes, even though it's a funny two-parter, because a lot of two-part episodes, and this is the case with most of the two-parters in the X-Files subsequently, are very much one story, and it is arced over two. This is almost like two different stories that are a two-parter, but they're sort of connected. And, you have the standard Dwayne Barry, hostage-taking, UFOs kind of thing. And then this episode is, it's the other shoe dropping, and it is the consequences of that. And Dwayne Barry doesn't play as massive a role in this. It's much more about the government conspiracy element, where Dwayne Barry was much more about the extraterrestrial mythology and the psychology of all that. So it's interesting how you have this two-parter, but it has two different elements to it. And, ultimately, Ascension suffers from two-parter syndrome because it's the action side of it now. It has to be a desperate chase to save Scully story, which is essentially what it is, with a tag act at the end, which, then kicks... Well, it establishes the next couple of episodes and ultimately starts to reconstruct the Mulder and Scully dynamic, and then from Firewalker we're off and it's back to business as usual. But so it has that issue of not having that central dramatic tension and power that Dwayne Barry does have. So it almost was never going to be as good.
And I think, like, we talk about how influential it is in terms of mythology, in terms of structure, you're right, you hit on it there. Like, and this is one of the things the X-Files does repeatedly over the run, sometimes better and sometimes worse, is it has a first parter which is relatively, I don't want to say low-key, but a first parter that is based around asking all these really interesting, intriguing, sort of powerful questions about what's going on in these really tense conversations. And then when they get to the cliffhanger, and I think this is something that sort of speaks to both Carter's strengths and weaknesses as a writer and executive producer. The second part, instead of wrapping everything up in a neat little bow, which a lot of 90s television does, the second parter says, well, wouldn't it be fun if we let the questions of the first act just hang, and instead we just go on this crazy rock and roller coaster, like blockbuster ride, where Mulder is like racing against time. It's a deadline scenario. Like, you'll find in a lot of the second parters, it's Mulder goes on a road trip. So here he goes on a road trip chasing Scully. In Endgame, he goes to the Arctic. In, like, Herrenvolk, he goes on a trip to this weird, creepy farm in the middle of, Canada. Is it actually up in Vancouver? I know it's shot in Vancouver.
I think it's round there, yeah. I think it's set round there as well, yeah.
Yeah.
You've got 731 on the train as well.
Yeah, which is literally a runaway sequence,
Yeah.
But I think it works very well in some cases, less well in others. But I think it's a tempo that they set up here, and I'd argue it gets very far on that. In that, like, Ascension works so well because there is so much urgency to it. Like, you sense Duchovny just sort of invests this manic energy in Mulder, this sheer desperation, and the script moves like it moves a mile a minute, which is it's probably for the best. And then it does have that, as you remarked, the stinger last act as well, which is where everything slows down and you soak in, oh my God.
Yeah, it is the realization, oh wow, she actually has gone. Like, this isn't going to be he saves Scully at the last minute like a lot of drama would have done. In fact, most drama would have done. It's like, oh wow, hang on, she's gone. What? And that's the beauty of it. And it was genuinely quite groundbreaking in that sense. That just didn't happen. The co-lead of the show just didn't disappear, and the bad guys didn't win in this way. And in this case, they do, and that's all part of the classic sort of Mulder never gets what he never gets the truth. He never gets what he's looking for. And in this case,
he loses something.
The most important thing to him. So it's powerful in that sense, but it lacks the power of something like Dwayne Barry, which is just extremely good writing and great direction and great acting, because it has to do all of these, like you say, it moves a mile a minute. It has to do all of these different things.
Like, it doesn't have a scene as good as Dwayne Barry and Mulder sitting in a dark room, matching wits and trying to figure each other out.
No,
there's nothing that matches that resonance. As exciting, as fast as it moves, there's nothing as investing as that, I think.
No, you're absolutely right, yeah. And it could be a consequence of the fact that, Carter doesn't actually write this one. It goes to Paul Brown, who was a relatively unknown name on the X-Files, really. He wrote 2 episodes. He wrote this and Excelsis Day, which is a very unmemorable episode in a few weeks.
It's quite memorable, just not for good reasons.
Not for good reasons, yeah.
Go get the Asian orderly is an actual line that Mulder utters at one point in the episode.
Yeah. But yeah, so he doesn't have but Ascension obviously is a good episode, but he's and he only produced in the second season up to Firewalker. So for whatever reason, he left the show after that, and he has
probably because somebody stole the script for Excelsis Day.
It could well be, yeah. So he didn't actually produce Excelsis Day. It was the one after that he wrote, and then he left the show. And he'd previously done things like Quantum Leap, and he did the odd Star Trek episode subsequent to this, but he's not a well-known name. So to see him on a massive episode, on one of the most important episodes of the X-Files, I'm presuming because Chris Carter was probably so busy directing Dwayne Barry and writing Dwayne Barry that he didn't actually get this almost he had to give to somebody else.
Part of me also suspects that there was a lot of rewriting and retooling going on there. There was a famous interview that Carter gave at the end of the 3rd season where he was basically talking about how, I don't know whether when he said it he was referring to the 3rd season or the 2nd season, but he's basically saying that last year I had to manually rewrite 20 episodes. And I suspect there's a lot of that in the early seasons. I think later on, when he gets to trust writers more like Gilligan and Spotnitz and stuff, there's a lot more individual voices. But right now, I think if you don't see a script credited to Howard Gordon or Morgan or Wong, I think you can sort of suspect that Carter was perhaps heavily involved. Now, I don't know, and I don't want to speak to that, but I do there are interviews from around that time where Carter is acknowledging that in his role as executive producer, he was doing a lot of rewriting. And you see a lot of Carter themes come up in scripts that are not explicitly credited to him. So, for example, like Aubrey just outlines this whole idea of history and victimization and memory, which Carter will then incorporate himself into stuff like Anasazi. And I don't know what happened behind the scenes there. I don't know if he touched a draft of the script, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did rewrite episodes like that heavily.
It sounds likely. It was only really towards the very end of season 2 and into season 3 he started to put the dream team together. With your Vince Gilligans and Peter Spotnitz and all these guys. So yeah, it sounds likely. IMDb give this episode a 8.8.
Wow,
which is
You're
the same. I know, out of 2,461 votes, which is the same as Dwayne Barry. Now, I can't help but wonder if this was voted at the same time, so that the same vote carries over, because it's a 2-part episode, because it is not as good as Dwayne Barry, and it would be very unusual to find somebody who thought it was as good as Dwayne Barry. So, you can't put massive stock in IMDb anyway, but as a general aggregate, it's quite high, I think, for this one.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of that. Like, I imagine IMDb only started adding television episodes in like the 2000s, so this would have been people watching it retroactively. So I suspect it wouldn't have been, okay, last night I watched Dwayne Barry, that's an 8. Tonight I watched Ascension, and that's a 6. It's like, no, I watched Dwayne Barry and Ascension, and it was awesome. That's an 8.
Exactly, that's probably how it works. So let's carry on and dive right into talking in more depth about Ascension. We're straight into it from the teaser, and we're back with the interesting flip side of the cliffhanger, because we hear what happens to Scully with Dwayne Barry on Mulder's answer phone as he comes in and he sits down in his flat, puts the answer machine on, and he's just sitting there thinking, and it's great because there's this great shot, this great push on David Duchovny, as he's listening to what is a seemingly a normal message from Scully, where she's going, "Oh my, this is strange, this chip, blah blah blah," and then suddenly crash, Mulder, and his face just goes like that. It's great. It's a great moment. I really think that's a very clever way of doing it.
Just like the audience kind of watching at home, really.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
When you were talking about like this being the flip side of the end to Dwayne Barry, part of me sort of wonders how cheeky that was on the part of Chris Carter, who was directing Dwayne Barry as his first episode. So at the end of his first episode, he's like, okay, Scully's going to get abducted, so we'll just have a shot of Dwayne Barry outside the window. And then when we do the big action sequence where Scully actually gets abducted, we'll move that to the start of the episode I'm not directing.
It could be. It could be quite. He did a few sneaky little tricks, like we talked about in the last one, about how he cuts to black. Yeah. He did a few of them, but they all work. They all work for dramatic tension.
Well, he's a fantastic director. It's just like for your first episode, I can understand that you might not be like, okay, maybe give this to. I think it's Michael Lang who directed this, who's sort of like a veteran television director. It's like, okay, for my first bit, I've done this. Maybe next time we'll work on it. We'll sort of ease up. But I would argue by season 6, maybe even by season 5, Carter is one of the best directors working on the show.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So that's not a disparaging remark on him at all.
And Michael Lang didn't do that many. He did in season 1. He did Young at Heart and Miracle Man, both of which are relatively unmemorable in terms of direction. And he later went on and did season 4's Unrequited, which
kept up that theme.
Yeah. Yeah, which is a very strange little episode about an invisible military man, which, yeah.
The thing I remember about Unrequited is the really weird structure, where it opens in the middle of the episode, but it's not even, like, necessary or a particularly strong middle of the episode. Yeah,
it's odd. It's an odd little episode. So this is probably the most memorable X-File that he directed. But again, it lacks that, he lacks that same skill set. But it is a good opening, it is a good opening. And then when we get to Scully's apartment, you see the aftermath of the window shattering and what we heard at the end of the episode. We see it through Mulder doing a bit of a Frank
CSI.
Black, or a CSI early Frank Black idea, where he's visualizing what happened through all the clues, like the blood on the wall and the smashed phone and everything like that.
The hair left round and the
yeah. It's good, that, and it, like I say, it almost, you can tell that Chris Carter already has one eye on what would become Millennium, which obviously then formulates much more Irresistible and things like that. But he already is putting those little things in there, I think, at this point.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think it is fantastically constructed. Like, I think there's not enough discussion of how much, say, early noughties television owes to Carter's vision, both here and, say, in Millennium, in terms of direction and in terms of style. Like, although there is a bit of there's like a really cheesy whiteout when Mulder goes into his imagining, but imagine a tighter cut of that looking like it would look like a modern CSI episode, or it would look almost like, say, Hannibal, the sequences in Hannibal where Will Graham imagines. And sort of this interesting emerging sort of televisual language, which I don't think the X-Files gets enough credit for. Like, we talk about the writing and the scripting and the themes and the ideas and all that sort of stuff. But in terms of basic televisual mechanics, the show was borderline revolutionary.
Yeah.
I think that this sort of thing is, okay, maybe it's not the best example, but it is an example.
Yeah, and we will get, when we do Millennium, which we will on the Xcast, we will get much, much more into that. And I mean, you mentioned Hannibal. All the Will Graham stuff in Hannibal is absolutely, completely Millennium, inspired.
Millenniumistic, if you will.
Absolutely. Brian Fuller, you can tell, watched that show and loved it 20 years ago. Because in many respects, Will Graham is Frank Black. It's just a more extreme, but then it all goes full circle because the X-Files and Millennium were inspired by Thomas Harris and The Silence of the Lambs, and it all connects.
Yeah. I mean, you could argue that, that Mulder is Will Graham. He's the profiler who had the nervous breakdown and ended up by himself, unable to connect to people. And Scully is Starling, who's this hot, newcomer arrival who's basically handed this assignment to deal with a really weird, intense person. So I think, it is very much, there's a lot of influence of Tom Harris on this, which, as you said, brings it all around. Yeah. I mean, I think, what's his name? Lance Henriksen even guest stars in an early episode of Hannibal.
He does, yeah.
Which is a very sort of literal acknowledgement of passing of the torch, almost.
Yeah.
I think he plays a father as well as one of the themes of the episode he's in, which sort of, I think, is another not too subtle nod at sort of the role the kind of the role that Millennium plays for.
Definitely. And you can see seeds of that here. And then finally, at the end of Mulder's Frank Black, Will Graham moment, you then get a very concerned Margaret Scully rush in, and Mulder says she's gone, basically. And this is only the second time we've seen Margaret, I think, after Beyond the Sea. We haven't seen her since her first appearance. So she gets a good role in the next couple of episodes, really, as we flesh out the Scully family a lot more. But it's a good way to lead into the main episode with Scully abducted, and we get a second change to the credit titles. So instead of The Truth Is Out There, we get Deny Everything, which is another. He's not become one of the most iconic phrases in the show, but I always like it when they change the titles, and they don't do it that often. And when they do, I think it's nice and effective.
The weird thing is that they do it for some very, very, very strange episodes. Like this is a big important episode, so it makes sense that you would do it for this. On the other hand, there are points where there are certain episodes where you wonder why they did it, like Teliko, which is I think has deceive, inveigle, and confuse or something.
Obfuscate, I think it is. Yeah.
Which is great. Nobody uses the word inveigle enough.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's true. And but on Teleco,
I feel like maybe that's the best thing about the episode.
yeah. The rest of it, no. But just that quote. But this is something that Carter and the crew was so good at, just creating these iconic little paranoid phrases. And, Deny Everything, again, it's not the most memorable, and it's not one of the ones that's passed into pop culture, but it's a good one. And, it obviously ties into something that X later says.
But, I mean, more than that, though. I mean, again, we're looking at this from the perspective of 2016, where everything is computer rendered, and changing that would be as easy as just changing a type in a file. In the 90s, those sorts of credit sequences were very much set, to the point where if regular characters didn't appear... I'm pretty sure, does Gillian Anderson appear in the credits to 3, for example?
Yeah, I think she does.
You can't tweak those. Well, as in the early 90s, it was very hard to tweak those. So there was something very novel about watching something that you had seen to this point, 30 times almost? Yeah. And seeing something subtly different. Not subtly, well, it's a big flash of light and it's there, but something that you didn't expect to be different.
That is true, yeah. That's something that isn't always immediately something you think about. But yeah, it would have been a lot more painstaking to do that back then. And it immediately, for me, whenever I see the title change, I go, oh, this is different. And it sort of locks me in a bit more, which is really good as well.
Remember that you said that when you get to Teleco.
Yeah. I think I may have to eat my words there, but we'll see. So yeah, we've got the other side of that teaser now, and Mulder is still there with Margaret, and she's talking about something very interesting, which is a very throwaway kind of bookending sort of conversation with these two, but it's something that very much sort of cues up one breath, and I hadn't really noticed this much before I watched this and took notes. When Margaret's talking about the dream she has of Scully being taken away, it's really interesting that she laughs it off as, oh, Dana wouldn't have believed that anyway if I'd have told her that I was worried about her. But it almost seems like a premonition that Margaret's been sent, and it's like a little spiritual wink to what the spiritual side that we get in one breath. I hadn't noticed that before.
Even beyond that, I mean, you get a lot of spiritual stuff. Carter begins sort of truly mixing the spiritual stuff with the mythology around about, say, the Blessing Way, for example. But you can see, it's weird to see it seated here. Because it's almost... I don't want to say it's subtle, because Margaret literally says, I had this dream about Dana being taken away. But it's lower key than it becomes in later episodes, like, say, The Blessing Way or Amor Fati, or even The Closure and Sign and Zit, where this stuff sort of goes from being like subtext or sort of a theme element and becomes like the most important thing about the episode, which is strange for people who tuned in for a story about aliens and smoking men. Yeah. So it's sort of interesting to see that seated here.
It throws you a little bit for a loop, which is interesting. In the next scene, we're at the FBI, and I think this is the only time in 10 years, well, if you think about it literally, 25 years nearly, that we ever get Mulder, Skinner, Krycek, and the smoking man in the same room at the same time. I can't think of another time that happens.
Yeah, I'm just running through the permutations in my head, and I can't. I think that's it.
I think this is it. And it's certainly at the point where not everybody knows everything about each other. That Mulder and Skinner don't. Well, maybe Skinner does, but Mulder doesn't know. Obviously, that Krycek works for the Smoking Man. We do. And we'll get into this more later, but there's a possibility that Skinner might know a bit more about this. But Yeah, it's a cool little thing. As I was sitting there watching, I was going, wow, this never happens again. This is the only time these four are together.
And the cigarette smoking man is just sitting in the corner puffing away with his ashtray.
Yeah. Yeah, he's just there. And, he's just watching it all. Nobody blinks an eyelid. Even though, and it's already, though, he's back, isn't he? Already he's back in that office. Yeah. Even though he was kicked out by Skinner. It didn't last for very long.
Which makes me sort of wonder, like, when you go to those briefings, when you're called up to Skinner's office, like, if it's your first day, like, what's the etiquette? Do you sort of, like, do you ask who the guy in the corner is? Do you introduce yourself? Do you assume, like, is there sort of like a thing, it's like, oh, we're going to go to Skinner's office, there's going to be a guy smoking cigarettes in a chair, don't mind him. He just hangs out there.
Yeah, he's just that guy. Don't worry about him.
Nobody knows what he does. We reckon he's just waiting to collect a pension.
That's Brian. Don't worry about him. That's fine. Maybe we should just call Smoking Man Brian now. Maybe that can be his alias, because we never get a proper full name. We get a sort of name for him later.
CGB, isn't it?
CGB. Maybe wonder what that stands for. C. Chris?
I don't know. He looks more like a Charles.
Do you reckon? Charles?
Yeah, I imagine like Chris is very casual for him. I think, yeah, I could see Charles as sort of like a Charles II sort of thing.
Charles II, yeah. If of course CGB Spender is his name, but we never quite know for sure. But yeah, he's there, and it's a good briefing. Skinner telling everyone, that Scully's gone. They've got a manhunt on the case. Crucially, he's all business. But he crucially shows a little bit of compassion to Mulder, even though he suggests that he not be involved, that he's too close to it all. Which, on the one hand, could be compassion. On the other hand, could be he's been told, make sure Mulder doesn't investigate this, because obviously we can't let him get to Scully before we get rid of her.
See, I don't know. Part of me sort of wonders if somebody had if the cigarette smoking man had leaned on Skinner in that way in relation to this, I'm not sure Skinner would have followed. I get the sense that Skinner's pursuit of Scully, or desire to return Scully, is entirely motivated and entirely sincere and entirely honest. I suspect the only way that this would work is if he didn't think the cigarette smoking man had anything to do with it, which is entirely logical. I think when Scully's been abducted by an FBI agent who's experienced a psychological breakdown. So I imagine if the cigarette smoking man said, look, we probably maybe should leave Mulder off this, I imagine Skinner's response would be, to hell with that. Whereas I think Skinner here is very much, he's the concerned father, the stern but concerned father. If we can use you, we will. Yeah, that's as close as you're going to get to a well done son.
Yeah, maybe that is true. Let's hope so, because that's a nicer moment for Skinner if that's the case. So yeah, Mulder, obviously we know he's not going to do that. We know he's going to keep searching, but we switch to the other side of things, and we're with Dwayne, and the song Red Right Hand by Nick Cave will forever be imprinted on my mind from this episode. This was the first time I ever heard this song, and every time I hear this song again, I think of this episode. I think of this scene, actually, where Dwayne is driving, and then he gets pulled over by a copper, and he just shoots the guy dead after saying, please don't stop, Dwayne Barry. Don't stop, Dwayne Barry.
I like the introductory question. It's like, can you turn off your radio? And he's like, I would, officer, but I got to keep going. It's like, well, I would love to oblige you, but I got a place I got to be.
I got to go.
I'm not in charge of this. This is not my show. If it were, this would go differently.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It is that the lyrical connections are interesting though, aren't they? Because the song, if you listen to the lyrics that are playing while this is all happening,
a microscopic fog in a catastrophic plan.
Yeah. Because Dwayne at this point, the big suggestion is that Dwayne obviously still is being controlled by an imperative. So as he turns around and says, "Don't stop me, I've got to go," in all this kind of thing. Where are you going? Well, I don't know. They'll tell me when I get there. It's things like that. He knows he's got to go somewhere. And later on, obviously, we find out that Skyland Mountain is very much a beacon for abductees, and they're just driven there by an imperative. It becomes more clear in season 5, but here it is very much he's not under control. Yeah,
directed. He is. Yeah, being manoeuvred by the Red Right Hand.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great bit of musical storytelling, I think.
It is, and I mean the X-Files actually gets very good at this. It's odd. I more associate this with Morgan and Wong than with Carter, because they do it. They have a number of these over the course of the show. So obviously, like Wonderful from Home.
Yes, yeah,
for example.
That's a fantastic one.
And they do something similar in their Millennium episodes as well, with like Owls and Roosters has like A Horse with No Name, which is, despite Vince Gilligan sort of doing his own take on that in Breaking Bad, that's still my definitive. This is what when I hear the music, this is what I see.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it's interesting to see that here, because it's something that I associate with a later show. You were talking about how when Margaret Scully says she had a dream, and it's sort of this spiritual connection, as something you associate with the later show. This sort of musical cue is something that I hadn't expected from the show at this point. Watching the episode again, and it just sort of took me back. I was very impressed at how sort of you could see the show practicing stuff that it would get really good at later
Definitely.
on. Not that this isn't really good. But.
No, I know what you mean though. It's a great scene, they do improve on this and keep doing it and everything like that. The patrolman that Dwayne kills is played by an actor called Steve McCarge, who would later appear in several different roles. He later appears in DPO in season 3 as Frank Kavit, the husband of Mrs. Kavit, which is what I always remember from that episode with Giovanni Ribisi going, Mrs. Kavit!
That's all you remember from that episode, which has Giovanni Ribisi and Jack Black and cows and Jerry Springer.
Yep, that's basically it. Yeah.
That's all I recall.
That's it. And just Mrs. Kavit! He just gets really angry. And and then he plays Scott Osselhoff, who's one of the FBI agents that Mulder kills in Gethsemane and Redux when there's all the thing about, Mulder's killed himself. Well, no, he hasn't. Don't worry. So, yeah, he's one of those.
Spoiler for a show that aired 20-odd years ago.
Yeah.
Mulder did not kill himself in the middle of the 4th season or at the end of the 4th season.
No, in case you're wondering.
Yes. Why David Duchovny is doing a lot of press for the show right now.
So, yeah, he's one of those classic Canadian actors who keeps reappearing.
Those faces as well, yes. I didn't recognise the episode he was from, but when I saw his face, I was like, yep, that guy has been in a lot of stuff.
He's another one, yeah. Although, after this, then, obviously, Dwayne gets out, lifts up the trunk, and we see Scully, that almost classic, Scully picture of Scully gagged in the boot, just looking up going, in one of the few scenes that Gillian Anderson would have shot for this episode, around giving birth. But do you think, now I don't know if I'm nitpicking, but I don't know if in 1994 they had CCTV that good on a police car that you could get such a high-resolution black and white image of Scully in that trunk. Enhance.
Well, we're talking about the X-Files predicting CSI, right?
Yeah.
I sort of look at that. I did wonder that as well. Like, the VHS quality is better than the VHS quality on a feature film VHS that you would have bought at the same time.
It's true. I did stop and go, really? At the, I wasn't sure about that, but it's a little bit of TV larger. I suppose it leaps out at me in the X-Files because the X-Files is normally really good, actually, at being fairly realistic with its technology and things like that and what it can do. When something like this comes out, I'm a bit like, not sure, but it's a minor point.
I mean, it's actually funny you should mention that. What strikes me, or what struck me on watching Ascension again and again and again, or sorry, not again and again, but watching it again.
All the time.
All the time. I watched it on loop the whole week just to get ready for this. But what sort of struck me about it was the idea that it's very much, and I think I mentioned this with Dwayne Barry as well, is that Dwayne Barry and Ascension are like episodes of police procedurals getting an X-Files twist on them. It's like Dwayne Barry, you could imagine Law and Order doing a version of Dwayne Barry and Ascension. Now, they'd probably involve a lot less aliens. I would just throw that out there. But there's a very interesting sort of procedural element to it. It's particularly obvious in Ascension, where, for example, you open with the flashbacks. And when Dwayne's traveling on Route 229, you don't just see Route 229 on the legend at the bottom of the screen. The camera actually takes a moment to pause and to pan up to a sign saying Route 229. And then you have Mulder putting together the information from the camera footage, and you have stuff like Mulder listening to playback and playing back the words. Hold on. This is your cue, by the way, Tony.
Ascending to the stars. Ascending to the stars.
Yeah, it's very much this...
I enjoyed my tape sound.
It was. I thought that was an inspired touch. But yes, tape sounds provided by Tony Black.
Yeah, there you go. It's my party trick.
That's your Police Academy sort of. Is it Michael Wincott?
Yeah. Oh, what was his name? In that Jones?
Jones. Jones. Yeah. Officer Jones moment.
Oh, I love Police Academy. Anyway, that's a separate podcast.
That's still
Police Academy podcast. I'll have to do it. Yeah.
Only 6 of them.
6 golden podcasts there.
But yeah, so basically you've got this interesting procedural element where it is very much about the mechanics of the investigation, which is rather strange to the X-Files, where the mechanics of the investigation usually involve like vampires or werewolves. I kind of found that very interesting watching it again, was that this is like a normal episode of like Law and Order or CSI if you just heaped a little aliens on top of it or a little government conspiracy on top.
It adds the X-Files, fairy dust on it, really.
Yeah.
And gives it that sheen.
Like a light teaspoon of crazy.
Yes. Speaking of crazy, Mulder is becoming increasingly obsessed at this point.
Oh, he is, and he's shaving less.
Yeah, no sleep, relying on coffee, and you've got obviously Krycek showing fake concern, whereas in Sleepless, all through Sleepless, he's very much he seems to be gaining Mulder's trust. He seems to be a genuine agent with some interest in the work and everything, and then at the end we obviously find out in Dwayne Barry he's there, but he's not playing a major role. In this one, he now is the inside man, and when Mulder figures out where Dwayne's going, there's that rattled look on Krycek's face as if it's like, shit.
Really messed up this one.
Yeah.
This is not going to look great on my end of year.
Yeah. And then, of course, we see him directly reporting into the smoking man.
Which I love, by the way. I love the idea that the cigarette smoking man is sitting in a car in the same car park as Krycek, just with his phone open. He's like, we should probably talk. You want to come to the car? No. This looks much cooler if we're calling each other.
Yeah.
And like after Krycek hangs up and gets in the car, there's a good 10-second difference between Mulder driving past and the cigarette smoking man going, oh yeah, he hung up. I should probably do that too.
Yeah, it's great because he's still got the phone there.
Yeah.
It seems like it's just for cool visual effects because he's waiting. There's nobody there, but he's like, I'll shut it in my own time.
Yeah, this will look much more dramatic.
It is a really good shot, though.
It is a great shot. It communicates a lot very effectively. But I do like the idea the cigarette smoking man parked his car specifically near the exit so that it would look cool when this happened. Yeah. Although, of course, if Mulder noticed him, it would be really awkward. I do like the recurring sense that, and again, something you got in Dwayne Barry, that all of this is beneath Krycek.
Yes.
Krycek, increasingly over the course of the two-parter, he seems like, and this is the thing that becomes like one of the things that makes Krycek such a great character, is the fact that he does all these horrible, horrible, horrible things, like make him, you should hate him. But on the other hand, he's constantly and repeatedly humiliated by everybody else in the show.
It's true.
To the point where you almost feel sorry for how ineffectual he is. Yeah. So here it's like, okay, you saddled me with the crazy guy. You tasked me with managing him. Okay, when do I get to go back to the cool job where I'm like assassinating people and like covering up alien crash land? And the cigarette smoking man's like, we'll get to that in time. Just stay there. Yeah.
There's a great scene later on in the episode that really sums this up, which we'll get to in a bit. But yeah, it's very much that frustrated kind of, I'm still here. Why am I still doing this?
I did not spend 5 years in assassin school for this.
Yeah. I think there's a golden Krycek prequel being waiting to written.
Or interquel,
Yeah, something like that.
Or even just the debriefing scenes where they're like, so we asked you to kill Scully, right? How the hell did you mess that up?
Oh yeah, it's funny. That'll be something we have to keep noting in the show. How many times does Krycek fuck up what he's supposed to do? Pretty much every episode, and this is no exception, because obviously now he's got to quickly saddle along with Mulder so he doesn't get, too far. I suppose in this episode you could say Krycek's effective, because obviously in the end he manages to succeed in slowing Mulder down.
We'll talk about this in a little while, I suspect, but I think a lot of Krycek's effectiveness in this episode hinges on the fact that Mulder is really, well, first of all, he's really tired, and second of all, for a guy whose motto is trust no one, he seems to have a very low skepticism threshold when bizarre things happen around him. There's a strange correlation between all the bad things that have happened to me during my hunt for Scully, in that they all seem to happen when Alex Krycek is left alone in a room with somebody.
Yeah.
No, it can't be anything. There's nothing there.
Takes him a bit too long to cotton on and go, hang on.
There is a linking factor here.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a nice line when Mulder's dropping off at the wheel and Krycek's rattling off, reasons about sleep deprivation, seemingly to keep Mulder awake. And he says, did they estimate how many people are put to sleep listening to their statistics? That's a nice
Even sleep deprived, Mulder is still a fucking smartass.
He can still do it, yeah. But there's also the point that, they're talking about how Dwayne knew to do what he did. And, Mulder's saying, well, maybe somebody gave him, Scully's address. And that is one of the big questions in the episode. Was it Krychek? Who was it? Who was it who gave, or was it just programmed into him? There is that suggestion that even though all of this seems to have a very alien, weird cause, there is definitely the government side of it, which is what this episode's all about, who have set this whole thing in motion and, may have given Dwayne a little bit of a push in terms of what he's supposed to do or what he's being told to do. I mean,
it's interesting. I think you hinted at this last week, where you were like, last week we get to see Dwayne surrounded by aliens. This week, when Dwayne hallucinates, he hallucinates a bunch of men in suits. And last week we got the UFO and the bright light and all that sort of stuff. This week, it seems very much like Scully could have been loaded into a helicopter the way this scene is shot. And I mean, even then, it's like when Krychek is in the car park having the conversation, he's like, I'll try and find the exact line, but he's basically like, I'll hold them off until they locate her. Yeah. And it's kind of, that's a line that's kind of like, I'm talking about Bob in accounting. I'm not talking about Zeldor from Alpha Centauri 3. Like, Bob, he can't find, with two hands. So I'll just delay Mulder until the guys get it taken care of.
Yeah.
So I think you're right that there's a very interesting split, sort of a cleave down the middle of the two-parter, where the first part is like, ooh, aliens, and the second part's like, ooh, government conspiracy.
Yeah.
And then obviously these become even more entangled as the show goes on.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. That's true. But this, of course, leads us to the big action sequence of the episode, and we've got the poor cable guy who's played by Peter Lacroix.
Another one of those faces.
He is, and interestingly enough, he shares some link to Steve McCage, because he's also in Unrequited. He plays the villain of the piece, or in inverted commas, Nathaniel Teager, who's the invisible assassin guy. So yeah, they're in the same episode. And previously, he played Frank Druce, the truck driver in EBE, who's also known as Ranheim. Yeah, so he only appears 3 times, but it feels like he appears more, actually. And I think possibly because he plays this. I always remember this guy in this episode because he really sort of, he really gets shit on a bit because Mulder threatens to pull his gun on him for a start, and this guy is basically just saying, "Look, listen to me because you might die. Okay, I'm just trying to help you at the end of the day." And Mulder's like, "No, I'm going in," and then Krychek just probably kills him, actually.
Oh, he does.
I think he does kill him,
the guy is still missing. Yeah, well, it's not explicitly confirmed, but the tram operator is still missing.
Yeah.
By the end of the episode, which is why I think that they blame it on the tram operator, which makes me wonder, like, what Krychek's story was. Krychek, you were armed, and the tram operator was right there with you. So what happened? He locked me in a cupboard, hijacked the thing, and ran off. He asked me to go get him a 2% cappuccino grande.
Yeah. There's a couple of interesting moments, apart from obviously the whole cable car stuff. There's the point where Krychek actually, hits the guy blunt force with the gun. He shows that really sort of nasty, but he shows that nasty side to him as he does it. But then he slicks back the hair, so there's that hint of vanity to it all, and the hint of readjusting himself back to the part he's playing. And I thought that was a great little, whether that was something Nick Lee just did, off the cuff, but I thought that was a great little character beat for Krychek.
It's a fantastic beat because you can see, like, when he hits the tram operator, like, Krychek is really, really angry at the tram operator. And you get a sense that this is like, okay, he's been on assignment for the past couple of weeks. This is like, get some stress out sort of moment. It's like, I finally have had to sit in the car with Mulder, nearly got run over by a truck, made to get coffee during a stakeout. Don't know how long I'm going to be here. This is my one chance to just let it all out.
Yeah, and I'm going to enjoy it. But then obviously Mulder's up in the cable car, and this is one of the most memorable, iconic sequences in the X-Files, really. The Skylar Mountain, cable car chase. It's the Moonraker sequence.
Sorry to lower the tone a bit there. It's a great scene. Reminds me of Roger Moore.
It's got to be done. Anything that reminds you of Roger Moore and Moonraker is fine with me. Absolutely fine with me. I'm a massive Roger Moore James Bond fan, so it's all good. But this obviously is well known for the fact that David Duchovny did his own stunts. And Chris Carter said at one point, David does like to do his own stunts, but he's adamant about the fact that we should see him and know it's him if he's going to risk life and limb to get up on top of a tram or a train, wherever he goes. So it's interesting how he was like, no, I'm going to do this myself. But I think, considering that you've got the comedy of a cable car trying to outrun a moving car,
Yeah, but the car has to go in circles.
Yeah.
The tram's got a line. And it could jump the tracks.
That's true. There.
Thank you, tram operator. You're concerned to not fall on deaf ears.
That poor guy.
Don't crank it over 25.
Yeah.
Mulder ramps it up to 30.
Yeah, and he's like, "No, I told you not to do that. You'll break the tram." It's funny, but it works. It works as a sequence, I think. And when Duchovny gets on the roof, and he's falling off the edge. It is well put together, even though you know he's going to be fine.
It's even just the way it's shot. It's shot at sort of sunset. Well, it's during the day when Mulder's going up there, but sunset by the time the tram starts moving again, and it just looks great to see Mulder sort of silhouetted against that. I mean, and again, we talk about the X-Files in terms of like just technical steps and improvements. Like, there's going to be a huge leap in Endgame with the submarine, which is just something that I'd never seen anything like that on television at that stage. Just in terms of scale. But this is an action set piece, maybe not from a 90s blockbuster, but from an 80s blockbuster on television, on a weekly television series. Like, there's a great quote from Carter where he says, the reason the X-Files worked as well as it did was because they didn't know what they couldn't do. And that involved stunts like this. And it is, like, it's not the best or the biggest stunt, because, like, Mulder's he's gonna jump on trains, he's gonna, he's gonna escape from the gulag on horseback.
Yeah.
Which is just one of those great, like, moments you never could have predicted the X-Files doing. Mulder escapes from a Russian gulag on horseback.
On a horseback.
He's going to survive, like, he's going to see a plane crash. This is the moment where I think all that begins. And I think that even if it looks sort of small by comparison afterwards, it's hard to get over just how striking it was at the time to watch. And even now, it's a good sequence. It's not as great as the stuff that follows, but it's a good sequence.
Yeah, it's well executed. And I think it's the point they realised that Mulder could be a little bit of an action hero as well as being the detective, the offbeat detective guy. I think they realised at this point, well, Duchovny's a young, physically fit man. He's up for it. Let's do a bit more, intense, big action set pieces. And obviously, as the budget went up and the popularity went up, they then did that, and it was great to see. So it's a good starting point for that.
I love the sequence in there where Mulder goes to the corner and takes out the safety harness, just sort of looks at it and goes, nah.
Yeah.
Not doing safety, nah.
But then obviously he's at the top and he finds the car empty and finds Scully's cross, which is a great little moment where, this is the start where he's starting to think, oh my God, I'm too late. And then the bright light, the what could be a UFO, which although it's pretty much suggested that it isn't, and then Dwayne going, I'm free! They took her! And then, who? Them!
And you're like, that's not the answer I was looking for, Dwayne.
Yeah. Who? Who exactly, Dwayne? And where? Where are they? But then
I'll just repeat what I said.
This is the thing, though. When you see that bright light for the first time, and then obviously the second time afterwards when it buzzes them and you get the act out, the first one very distinctly looks like a plane. It looks like a plane that has probably some alien tech involved, but you can see the tail on it. So it's you know pretty much that that's one of the the kind of things the kind of things they were flying in Deep Throat, where they were experimenting on all this tech. It's definitely government. So it's ambiguous, but you can pretty much figure that out. So that's the difference between the thing that was above Dwayne's house that we talked about in the last episode,
where it's sort of a 50s style UFO.
Yeah.
It's the thing that pops up again in My Struggle as well. It's a very 50s UFO.
Yeah, exactly.
As opposed to the stuff they're looking at later in the episode. But when you talk about that sequence where Scully is abducted, I think like abducting Scully is as much as I don't like the way that it turns into like a Mulder angst thing, it's a very clever storytelling decision because like you get the sense Mulder is the one who would want to be abducted. Mulder is the one who wants to experience it, who wants to encounter aliens.
Yeah.
And so like you get the sense when he was talking with Dwayne in Dwayne Barry, there was almost a sense like you could see that Mulder was sort of wondering if he went on the road trip with Dwayne, would he get to finally experience firsthand what he was looking for? So I think like taking Scully instead is a very clever reversal of that, because I think, and it comes back around, say, the 7th and 8th season, where Mulder's character arc resolves in Mulder finally having that experience.
Yeah.
Like that's Mulder's arc coming full circle, is him finding out what happened to Samantha firsthand by living through it. And I think that it's very clever and very tragic to have Scully go through this, and it was, let's face it, when it happens to Mulder, it's not very pleasant either.
No.
But to go through this thing that Mulder would want to have happened, or Mulder would be curious to have happened to him, or would represent for Mulder a sense of closure, and instead becomes an even bigger, more gaping wound.
Yeah,
I think that's very clever.
It is. And what's also interesting is that in the middle of the sequences with Dwayne Barry, you have him do another whiteout, moment, but one where he imagines what's happening to Scully. And he looks in the window at Skyline Mountain, and in the reflection of the light, he flashes to Scully, and it's that classic moment where she's in that completely white sort of bay, a very, very different to how Dwayne experienced alien abduction, how Mulder later experiences.
It's the invert of it, yeah.
Yeah, and it's the suggestion, because all through the show it's suggested that Scully wasn't abducted by aliens at all. She was abducted by government scientists in the Syndicate, and that's more than likely what happened to her. So it was, and so where she is probably some sort of advanced military base where she's actually being experimented on, and obviously there's that great shot of a very pregnant Gillian Anderson lying there with the tube over her stomach. But and while it's obviously a visual thing for the pregnancy, there's also all the underlying ideas that later on come into terms of the seed of her eventual pregnancy being laid, Scully's eventual pregnancy being laid. So there's a lot in that for whether or not it's real or not, because obviously it's from Mulder's imagining. The suggestion is, and you see like faint images of what could be men or could be aliens. But it is probably that kind of visual, and it's all white. Again, it's the spiritual thing though as well. It's the complete whiteness of it. It's visually, it's very impressive, and it's interesting how Mulder goes there.
And it's also a nice excuse to actually physically use Gillian Anderson while she was 8 or 9 months pregnant at that point as well.
Yeah, it works on both levels really. But yeah, obviously Dwayne's captured now. The FBI are there, and this is, even though it's not as good a sequence as in Dwayne Barry, it's pretty good because it's intense, and this is the most, I think, one of the most off the rails points we ever see Mulder in the show, where basically he's very quietly saying, "Did you kill her?" And he's like, "No," and then he just chokes him.
Well, then he finds the blood. Yeah, he finds the blood on his wristband, isn't that it?
Yeah. That's what triggers him off. Yeah. Because Dwayne says, "They'll tell you where she is," and that's when he sees the government men and the military's in on it. Just ask them, and all this kind of thing, as if to say, they know what's happened. It's not me. I'm just the guy. I'm just doing what I was told. It's not my fault. He's very much abdicating responsibility for it, isn't he? All the way through. Yeah.
Which is interesting, because part of me sort of wonders if Mulder's sitting there, like, with the flashes at the start of the episode, which are very sort of Frank Black, very Will Graham stuff, where Mulder's sitting here listening to Dwayne Barry say, "I didn't hurt her, it was the voices, I was made to do it." Part of me sort of wonders if Mulder's not flashing back to, like, he wants to believe that it's aliens, but like, how often has he been in this interrogation, and as a profiler, it's been a serial killer saying that he was driven to do it, or that he didn't mean to do it.
Yeah.
How many times has he been through this process, and it's been something more mundane, and the body, is not up in the heavens, it's buried in a ditch somewhere. I don't know. I thought that was a very interesting idea.
Yeah, it is. And that comes around in episodes like Paper Hearts, doesn't it? With people like John Lee Roach and the kind of people he's dealt with before and everything. It's really interesting. And I think what struck me, apart from Mulder's really dark moment where he's choking Dwayne, it's the point afterwards where Dwayne just, after he's coughing, and he says, "Oh, I'm sorry." He's just sorry. He's just saying, I didn't want to hurt her.
I hope they're not hurting her. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I hope they're not hurting. He's as much. This is the point you realise. He is as much of a victim as anyone else. And he's the Lee Harvey Oswald of all this. He's the fall guy, and it's a sad moment, really, because at the same time, while you can understand why Mulder would get so angry and intense, it's at the same time you go, well, this isn't really Dwayne Barry's fault.
This isn't the person you should be directing it at.
No, exactly. But it's a really good scene. It's one of the best scenes in the episode. I had to wonder, and obviously, he comes out and then he tells Krychek, no one goes in there, and he's like, No one. And then he walks off. He's like, no one interrogates him. No one.
No one but me. You're like, what if Skitter shows up?
Yeah, no. But he's our boss. No.
You've seen 24, right? That's not going to be invented for another 11 years, Mulder. Yeah, but we're doing that.
Yeah, it's a big Jack Bauer. But I did wonder, how long does Mulder zone out when he's thinking about the Scully? I did wonder this, because it's long enough for Krycek to be able to get in there and have a relatively long conversation or whatever happens in there. I was just thinking, is he there for like 15 minutes, just sort of staring? And I did wonder.
Sitting there staring at him, going, "When is the poison I put in his water going to kick in?"
Yeah,
he's just going on.
But that's the thing, isn't it? Skinner then turns up with his entourage behind him. Quite a lot of guys. You realise this is the point. This is the first time we've seen Skinner outside the office as well. So he's got his boys with him. You can tell he's a high up. This is the point. He's a high up, G-man. And then Mulder, then Krycek is in with Dwayne. And obviously, the big suggestion is that Krycek poisons him. Would you say that's more than likely what happens here?
I would say that's more than likely what happens here, unless because Mulder. There's no way that, from what we see, that Mulder choking him caused a delayed reaction. I don't believe that.
Yeah, no.
And I think that, yes, if you were producing the episode today, it would probably be a very different, very darker sequence with I can't breathe or I can't choke or whatever. I think they would have played that a bit more. I think here the implication is very much that, Mulder left him and he was fine. Krycek was in there alone with him. And then all of a sudden, he gave him, is Dwayne drinking water in the sequence with Krycek?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, he's drinking something out of a little plastic cup, isn't he?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the big suggestion is more that I think Krycek put something in that, and he may be under the. But he's also talking to him. You don't quite know what he's saying to him. It could well be you need to make sure you know. He could in fact just be trying to placate Dwayne, knowing full well he's poisoning the guy and he's going to die, and he's just saying, "Here you go, mate. You'll be okay. Don't worry." Playing good cop, and then he really is giving him the poison chalice. But we don't know for sure. But obviously then Dwayne dies, and we have Mulder staring at his wrapped up body like a mummy, and talks to a really odd pathologist. This always sticks out to me because I think either she's a really bad actress or she was zoned out that day. Because it was really odd because she just really delivers her lines in a really flat monotone way and says, "Yeah, you'll have to go through military channels," and then she looks away. Like, as she pushes the trolley away.
to be fair, it's a very odd scene because it starts like Mulder questions her and she's initially ready to provide answers. So it's like, what are your preliminary findings? And then she sort of reads the clipboard and she's like, okay, it reads the burn to the face, cause of death, asphyxiation. And Mulder's like, okay, cool, that's great. When you're done, can you send me a copy of the report? She's like, no.
Yeah, no.
It's classified. Why the hell did you just read that to me?
Yeah. What's the point of that? It is odd. It is. I think the point obviously is to make that. Yeah, he can't get answers with Dwayne. This is where all the shutters start coming down now. This is where they start to lock everything up. He can't get access to Dwayne's pathology report, which would probably prove that somebody poisoned him just before he was killed. He died. Was obviously that's being locked away. So it's all starting to fall into place. And this now is where we get that really great scene with Krycek and the smoking man at 6:16 a.m. Which...
there we go. As subtle as ever,
yeah.
Mr. Parker.
But then apart from the obvious, devil
At least I don't get an elevator up to work, says Skinner.
I just kept thinking, well, do they ever sleep? Who meets at 6:16 a.m.? I mean, it's ridiculous.
We had that discussion about the cigarette smoking man waiting just the right moment to close his phone. I can totally believe he's like, okay, I can do 6:15. He's like, no, 6:16.
6:16. I haven't left the car park. He's just stayed there. That's where he's been for like 2 days. I'll stay here. I'll sleep here.
You'd be surprised. You can live on vending machines.
But it's a really good scene. This it's brief, but there's a lot of things in here. I mean, the first thing is there's the suggestion that Krycek had a longer assignment, and he talks about this a little bit in Sleepless in that scene, But I kept thinking, what assignment did Krycek have? My instinct is that the idea would have been that before they realised that Scully was still involved and still a problem, and they had to take care of that, the idea was that with those two split up and the X-Files shut down, Krycek becomes his new partner and ultimately does what Scully was originally meant to do and discredit him and leave him bereft, get him out the FBI and leave him with nothing, basically. I think that was the original plan. And then when Krycek goes and says, Scully's a problem, she's still involved, he's still working with it on the sly, you need to do something about this. That's when they kicked in this abduction plan. I don't know about you, I think that is what was really going on.
Okay. I I more imagine that Krychek was just basically playing babysitter, and that like his job was basically to scope out if Mulder and Scully were still connected to each other. And I imagine if Mulder had kept investigating X-Files type things, that was his job, was basically to point out to the right people. You know the way you close the X-Files? Well, it turns out Mulder's really just kind of been doing the same thing since then.
Doesn't make any difference, he's still going to do it.
Part of me sort of wonders if he would have rattled out, say, Skinner, for example. If he would have exposed, say, Skinner as somebody who was vaguely, as a friend at the FBI, if he'd been left there for longer.
Maybe.
Like, part of me sort of wonders if that was the long game, if it was basically to figure out who was helping Mulder, and basically to keep Mulder away from these things.
Well, there is a line in Sleepless, in that final scene, where they talk about the fact that Krychek mentions he's more than likely got a new contact now. So that could well be it, actually. It could be that Krychek's there to suss out who Mulder is getting his information from. So, because they know Deep Throat primed somebody else to take over if he gets killed. Just in case of my death, you
Break informant, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So it's because the suggestion in Sleepless, as we've talked about in a few episodes ago, is that X is doing this out of a loyalty to Deep Throat. Out of some, because obviously there was a connection between the two men that we never saw, but he comes to Mulder to begin with out of this loyalty to his friend or his colleague or his mentor who's been killed.
And really sassily as well. He's not happy about this.
No, he's not. He doesn't want to be there. But you've got that, so you've got all that going on. You've also got the great moment where, and this is repeated in the X-Files movie, the first one, where Krychek just says, well, why don't we just kill him? After all this, why don't we just kill him? And he says, you kill Mulder, you turn one man's work into a crusade. Which is something that, funnily enough, it was asked by Harlan Ellison, the well-known science fiction writer, at the beginning of the show. It was one of the first questions that people were rattling around and saying, well, why don't they just kill Mulder? So this was their response to that.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, they had multiple different responses over the course of the show's run, particularly in the early days. And you're about to see another one in a moment. I think we'll talk about that, which is like this idea that Mulder is protected on high for somebody. Although I think Ascension is the point at which they go, well, actually, it turns out the guy protecting Mulder from on high, there's somebody else who's a little on higher.
A little bit higher.
A little bit higher. I don't know. Part of me sort of, when it comes to killing Mulder, part of me always suspects that at this point in the show, at least, he's not as big a concern. Like that's why I would have thought having Krychek there. Krychek is there basically to smoke out potentially bigger problems that tie into Mulder. That would be sort of what I would have imagined. So he's like, find the X, find out if Skinner is actually the man I think Skinner is, or if Skinner's actually helping. That's sort of why I don't imagine Krychek's end game would have been to humiliate or to destroy Mulder personally. It would have just been sort of figure out who's connected to him, who's helping him. Because the people who are helping Mulder are inevitably more involved or bigger and I think potentially more dangerous to the conspiracy at this point. Because obviously the cigarette smoking man has no idea how incredibly one-note determined Mulder can be.
That's true. I think that you've got me thinking about that now. I think that could be the case. The other thing, obviously, in this conversation is the suggestion we mentioned earlier that Krychek is a drone to the smoking man. That he turns around and says, you have orders to be carried out. You're not. This information is beyond you. You will carry out your orders. And he's very dismissive of Krychek. He's just another guy to the smoking man at this point. He's just another dude who's there to do a job. Whereas Krychek's like, well, hang on a minute, I'm Alex Krychek. I should be a bit more in the loop here. And he goes, you have no rights. You have orders to carry out. It's very good. Very good moment between them.
It is a great moment. I like these little flashes of the idea of what the mythology must be like behind the scenes. And you get a bit of that with X later on, where there's a sense that like X, you're not seeing everything about X and you're not seeing everything about Krychek. Like you imagine Krychek imagines himself starring in the Krychek show.
yeah, definitely.
And the cigarette smoking man's like, no, not at all.
Well, he's the hero of his own story, and this becomes more clear later on, especially much further down the line, where Krychek basically is trying to tell Mulder, look, everything I'm doing is to help, basically. He thinks he's the hero. It's a classic villain thing. Krychek thinks he's the hero, and Krychek all his actions are justified.
As the anti-Mulder. Basically, Krychek sees himself on like a sexier, more determined version of the X-Files. That's how Krychek sees this.
Yeah. Whereas everyone else just thinks he's a murderer and a twat, basically.
Rat boy.
Rat boy, yeah. But yeah, this now, it's a great little scene, and it's now we get a few little, wrap-up scenes. You've got Mulder being questioned by the FBI, and he then starts putting all the theories out there, saying, well, what, it could have been this, it could have been this, and then the guy says, why are you so paranoid? And then he goes, well, maybe it's because I don't trust anyone.
Also, maybe because my partner got kidnapped and I haven't slept in 5 weeks.
You shut my work down. My partner's been kidnapped. I haven't. Yeah, exactly.
I was almost murdered on a cable car. That stuff tends to make you paranoid.
What I really like as well, the low-key element of the last scene between Mulder and Krycek. It's really good because there's no revelations, there's no histrionics. It's just Mulder going, I need to borrow your car. And that's it. And you just see Krycek just look at him and he's gone then. I thought that was great. Just a really low-key, buff, he's gone.
Which I like about... Well, here's the thing. I get the sense from the scene with the cigarette-smoking man earlier on that isn't the implication that Krycek is meant to stay on Mulder a bit longer? He's like, my assignment here is done. So I get the sense that this isn't... Krycek doesn't see this as being the end of the relationship.
No, exactly.
And I really like that Mulder is like... After giving this really railed paranoid, like the guy, one of the FBI agents asked Mulder, why are you so paranoid? And we go straight to a scene of Mulder asking the man who murdered the tram operator, who murdered Dwayne Barry, who was complicit in the abduction of Scully, and who has been rapping about the cigarette smoking man, hey, can I borrow your car? Just Mulder has a really terrible sense, and it happens again and again over the course of the show. It happens again in Colony and Endgame. There's another great example of this, of like one person Mulder should not trust, and Scully is kind of like, Mulder, you should not trust this person in Colony Endgame.
What are you doing?
But Mulder's like, no. Trust me, I'm the paranoid one here. I know how this works. He seems on the level.
It is true. It's true.
Mulder, terrible judge of character.
Really bad judge of character, and he still thinks he's got connections in Congress. But this is the point now where he goes to see Richard Matheson, but he's turned away. Well, he doesn't even get there because X appears out the shadows and says, "Don't bother. He's not going to see her." And he basically turns around and says, "Your channels are closed. You are persona non grata now. Everyone has put the shutters down. This is beyond any of us." And and this is where he says they only have one policy. Deny everything. And it's a great little moment, isn't it, for X to basically he's not being all cuddly like Deep Throat. He's not going to give him a little passcode to a facility where he can find Scully. It's very much a case of tough shit, mate. She's gone. You've got nothing. Deal with it.
Yeah, I really like the sense in Ascension and Dwayne Barry that like people like X and Krycek, Mulder is just really fucking annoying. Yeah. It's like they deal with this stuff every day. This is their work job. This is their day-to-day job. Yeah, this is what they do. They know what they're doing. And Mulder's just like, no, gonna bumble on in here. I know what I'm doing. I'm gonna get all righteous and indignant. And like Krycek's like, oh dear God, can you take me away from this guy? And X is just like, look, mate, you have no idea on the scale in which you're operating.
It is. He's like an annoyance, isn't he? He's like a little flea that keeps buzzing round that they just want rid of. Well, X doesn't want to help him, but he will help him because of that loyalty. Whereas Krycek just wants rid of him, and and obviously the Smoky Man has deeper reasons, which we find out later. But,
which I think is the best reason that they could come up with. I have issues with that plot revelation, but it's the best reason I think the writers could come up with to explain why the hell isn't Mulder dead?
Dead, yeah, exactly. Why don't they just take that chance and just kill him off? But yeah, and this is now the point. Finally, Mulder sees what everyone else has been seeing, and he's in the car. He's looking around, and he finds the cigarettes in the ashtray, and then suddenly it's ping.
Which is great. We talked about this last week when like it was Alex Krycek shows up and watches Mulder in the swimming pool, or like in Sleepless, where it's like Krycek is set up as this sort of third wheel in the Mulder and Scully triangle, where it's like Mulder doesn't figure out that Krycek is evil from any of the evil crap that he does that involves murder and mayhem. He figures out by checking the ashtray in the car, which is like discovering that your partner's cheating on you. It's like one of the things that you... Yeah. And it is very much like a Krycek's been unfaithful, Krycek's been cheating on me moment. It's like, you can imagine this in like a tense relationship drama. It's the moment where Mulder realizes that the man he thought he loved was not the man he loved at all.
It's the lipstick on the collar, isn't it?
That's it, exactly.
Basically. And
or the lipstick on the cigarette butt.
Yeah. Exactly. And now after this, Mulder and this is one of my favourite Mulder and Skinner scenes. This
and Mulder goes like straight from completely trust Krycek to okay, let's put my career on the line and hang the guy out to dry.
Yeah.
There's like no hesitation, no sort of gently feeling this around. We like cut to Skinner reading a report that is. I like to imagine Mulder typing that up, muttering angrily to himself in the wee hours of the morning.
Damn you, Alex! Damn you! I trusted you. But it's exactly, and he lays it all out to Skinner. But what I really like about this scene, apart from the fact this is the moment where Skinner goes, "There's only one thing I can do. I'm reopening the X-Files. That's what they fear the most." Great little moment. But
I like how Skinner sounds like he came from a 1940s film there.
He's like,
James Cagney.
Yeah. You dirty rat boy. But it's it's the little subtle moment before that phone rings where Skinner presumably is spoken to by somebody in the conspiracy who basically says that Krycek's compromised, we've got him out, and but it's that little moment where Mulder's saying, Who does Krycek work for? How far will they go? And Skinner he goes to say, I didn't give him the assignment. And he's cut off. It's like Skinner's about to tell Mulder a little bit more that Skinner knows about all of this, but he's cut off by that phone call. And immediately that's when he opens the X-Files, because that's the only thing he can give Mulder. But what he was going to say, he cuts off, because somebody on the end of that phone has gone, "Careful, Walter, right? Just watch it." I really think that, because he just shuts down. It's a really subtle moment, but it's really good.
It's a great sort of paranoid moment. Like, the X-Files do these things so casually and so frequently that you forget how well they work.
Yeah.
But it's like, as you said, he's cut off right on the word.
Yeah.
It's not even like he's about to begin a sentence or he's hesitating and he's thinking about saying. He's like, I didn't give him the assignment, comma, I only, and then, it's like, bam!
Bam.
Fist of God comes down.
Yeah. And
cigarette smoking man in the car park hits that dial button.
Yeah, he's got the office bugged. He's hearing it. I mean, we joke about this, but it could well be the case. But he's here, and then he gets the call, and he just snaps, and he's back to business. And that little insight into Skinner, that little window that he wants to help Mulder more, is gone. And the only thing then he can do is reopen the X-Files. That's his only power that he's got. His only bit of rebellion to these people who are putting the pressure on him. And he can give Mulder back his work. That's all he can do. And I think it's a really, it doesn't feel like a forced way to get the X-Files back. That's what I like about this. It feels like a natural sort of action by Skinner at this point, after everything that's happened to Mulder. I buy it. It doesn't feel like it sticks out like a sore thumb. Not like in the Revival series where suddenly the X-Files have been reopened. We need you back, Mulder. Why?
Never mind, we're just investigating a lab now.
Yeah.
From like Skinner dialing Mulder at the end of My Struggle 1 to Mulder and Scully investigating a guy who stabbed himself in the ear.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, but this feels quite organic, so I like it for that.
Well, I also like, and this is something that's true here, but I think is true of like scripted drama in general, is that if you're going to revert to a status quo, so if you're going to back out of, like, you make a big change, like you break up the X-Files, or say in Wrath of Khan, you kill Spock, or for example on Deep Space Nine, they have to surrender the station.
Yeah.
If you want to get that status back, the best way you could do that, the best way the best scripts do that, is they make it clear that there is a cost. So they're happy to revert, but that reversion comes at a cost. So like in Star Trek 3, like Kirk gets Spock back, but he has to lose the Enterprise and his son to do it. Or in Deep Space Nine, they reclaim the station, but it's in an episode called The Sacrifice of Angels.
Yes.
Where one of the recurring characters is killed off, and Sisko is told basically, look, we will do this for you, but there will be a cost down the line.
Yeah.
And I think that here it's like, not to trivialize like the way that what happens to Scully, but it's very much like, okay, we've reset the status quo and we've reopened the X-Files, but it came at this horrendous cost.
Yeah.
This is what had to be paid to get here. And I think that as a dramatic hook goes, it's very clever, and it's very well earned in a way that when something similar happens later down the line in the 6th season, I don't think it's as well earned as that. No,
me neither. And that season 6 arc isn't. I don't think it's as good as this.
No, it's not. It lacks the tight focus.
It does, and this really does that well, and it really puts that together well. And like you say, it has that natural feel to it. But then we've got quite a melancholic, sad final few scenes. You've got the nice final bookend scene with Margaret Scully talking about the dream again, and where Mulder goes to give her the cross that he found in the car, and she says, well, he says, doesn't he? He says, I didn't stop to think, if she was such a skeptic, why did she wear that cross?
Is this the first time that this has been mentioned? Because I haven't watched the show in a little while, but you've been watching it as you've been doing these. Is this the first time that sort of Scully's religious faith and the contrast that represents with her skepticism has been explicitly broached?
I think so. I think it's sort of suggested in Beyond the Sea, but and maybe slightly in Miracle Man, but only a little bit. And I think certainly in Beyond the Sea, it's much more about Scully being the believer and a relationship with her dad as opposed to the religious aspect. So this really feels like the first time that the cross and the meaning of that cross is played here. And I think it's a great little moment where Mulder says, well, there must be some element of believer in Scully if she can believe in God. And that's the great idea of the faith, and then, of course...
Well, it becomes such a great part of Scully's arc. And I think Mulder and Scully tend to be treated as archetypes in pop culture, for better or for worse. And I think that's part of the reason why they've latched on and they've become so iconic, is that you can say, like, if you describe somebody as like Scully or like Mulder, you know instinctively that somebody's like a believer or a skeptic. But I think that one of the clever things the show did was it added this sort of layering to it, where Scully could be skeptical about aliens and UFOs and stuff, and still believe in like Catholicism, and still believe in God and a religious and spiritual dimension to the world. Whereas Mulder could believe in aliens, but he couldn't believe in like an all-powerful, almighty God divining.
And ultimately, when the two become one in like the 6th season, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? When the suggestion is made that aliens are God, that becomes even more complicated. But we're a long way from that, and this is a really nice way of putting that more on the table, which obviously gets explored much more.
But you're right, actually. That's a sort of a nice metaphorical sort of union of Mulder and Scully. There's your shipping.
Oh, yeah.
Spaceship, if you will. Thematic spaceship.
There's your space shipping, yeah. Which is what it should have been called in this show, really. But then you've got the lovely moment of Margaret turning around and saying, well, you keep it. When you find her, you give it to her, which is the lovely bit of hope that her mother has. She hasn't given up hope, and she doesn't want Mulder to give up hope either. That, classically, he hopes he can find his sister, and that's what drives him. It's now, the same hope is that Scully can be found as well. So it's a nice moment, really. And then you got the final scene of Mulder standing on Skyland Mountain, looking to the skies, and it just underscores his loneliness and the fact he's on his own.
You can almost hear like the Jose Chung closing narration over that. While we wonder if we are whether we are still alone or whether we're not alone in the universe, most of us are alone down here.
Yeah.
Although in a much more melancholy and sad way, because Mulder is much more alone now than he was, at the start of Mary.
And the interesting thing is now, and this is something that is explored a lot more in 3 next, the idea that Mulder's now at a point where he doesn't work properly without her, and this is what we see next. In that, without Scully now, he can't really cope. He gets much too drawn in. He gets much more personal for him, and before Scully came into his life, he was like that, but she means so much to him now, and she's become such a part of his life that without her, he doesn't fully work, and that's the next logical arc, and that's why I'm really glad they did 3. I mean, I know it was obviously Gillian Anderson was off giving birth and things like that, but I really like the fact we got that, because we needed to see that, I think. We did, and while I have issues with 3, one of the things I quite like is that as the show goes on, it gets to compare and contrast Mulder and Scully's relationships in different ways. So, like, you do get 3 is what happens when you end up with Mulder without Scully. And then you get this much more drawn out arc down the line, which is what do you end up with Scully without Mulder? Yes.
And in comparing and contrasting them, I think it's safe to say Scully manages without Mulder a lot better.
Yeah, she does. She
struggles. Doesn't fall apart. Yeah, she struggles, and you can see her struggling to hold it together. But Mulder completely implodes.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the Mulder rebound sex episode. If you had any difficulty imagining that Mulder and Scully were not meant to be a romantic or sexual relationship, you should note that he compensates for the loss of Scully by hopping into bed at the first opportunity.
With a sexy vampire.
Sexy vampire, which, let's face it, that's a very X-Files rebound episode.
Yeah. And if you're going to rebound, do it properly. And he does it with a sexy vampire. So, well done, Mulder. But that's all coming next week anyway.
Next week on the X-Cast.
On the X-Files.
You wasted a trip, Mr. Mulder. There's nothing the senator can do for you now.
What?
Not without committing political suicide.
Why? Do they have something on him?
They have something on everyone, Mr. Mulder. The question is when they'll use it.
I need his help.
No one can help you now. Your channels of appeal and recourse are closed.
Your predecessor could have helped me. You know, don't you? You know what's happened to her.
This reaches beyond any of us, Mr. Mulder. Even my predecessor.
I want an answer.
Why kill Dwayne Barry if there was nothing to hide?
You mean the government?
There are no answers for you, Mr. Mulder. They only have one policy. Deny everything.
So now we're going to finish off by doing the X quiz. 5 questions and a quote on Ascension. And you've been doing okay, Darren, recently on the quizzes.
I've done okay. Now I've got a feeling that I can see the perfect score ahead of me, but I'm not sure I'm there yet. I think let's give it a go.
Let's hope. Let's see. 5 questions and a quote on Ascension. So let's dive right in. Question 1. You may get this because I think you mentioned it earlier. Name the route that Dwayne Barry gets intercepted.
229.
Yeah, well done. Didn't even have to finish the question, and you get the answer. That's good.
To be fair, I think they also used like Route 219 at one point, so that would have been 211. I think in my notes.
Yeah,
that would have been a very mean question, Tony.
It would have been
thrown out there.
Extremely mean. This might be mean as well. When Krycek is talking about his statistics to Mulder to try and keep him awake and doing almost the opposite, he mentions a Department of Transportation stat that so many accidents are caused by sleep deprivation. What number does he give?
200,000.
Oh, that was such a good guess. 190,000 accidents. Oh, I almost want to give you the point for that, but if I'm being fair, I can't. But that was a great guess. 190,000 transport accidents are caused by sleep deprivation. So, yes.
But unfortunately, there are no statistics on how many people put to sleep listening to those statistics. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Question 3. What department in the FBI want Mulder to take a lie detector test?
I'm going to guess that's Internal Affairs?
Well, it kind of is, but it's called something different. It's called OPR, which is Office of Professional Review, which I think is the group who are in the Fight the Future. I think they're the people who
with
look
Liz
into that.
Daner.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, no. Damn it. Today's not going to be the day, Tony. Today's not going to be the day.
There will be other days. When Krycek is questioning Mulder and saying, he was gagging and things like this, Mulder asks if he said anything. What does Krycek say that Dwayne Barry starts whistling?
Stairway to Heaven.
Stairway to Heaven. Well done. Okay. That's 2. That's 2 out of 5.
I like to imagine that there's a version of the Wayne's World scene, that sort of no stairway.
Oh, that'd be good. Question 5, how old was Scully when Margaret gave her the cross necklace on her birthday?
15th birthday.
15th birthday, definitely. Very good.
So 3 out of 5.
3 out of 5.
Let's see if I can nail the quote.
That's pretty good. Let's see if we can get the quote. Okay, here we go. Well, that's an interesting spin on the Nuremberg defense.
Oh, that's Skinner talking. It's during the initial briefing when basically they're outlining. That's one explanation, and there's another explanation, which is that he's being driven by voices in his head.
Yes, bang on.
It's also a very nice sort of thematic connection back to, because the X-Files then, towards the end of the second season, really starts hammering this conspiracy as Nazis thing.
Yeah. It's almost
it's a good zinger.
Yeah, it is a good one. So 4 out of 6. Pretty good.
Not bad.
Not bad. You're going to hit that 6 one day. You are.
One day.
You are. You're going to hit there. So yeah, well done. 4 out of 6.
6 out of 4 would have been a much better score.
So that brings us to the end of our first 2-part episode of the X-Cast, covering Ascension. So it's been great to have you back, Darren, to talk these 2 episodes. You're going to come back for the almost part 3 of this, which is One Breath in a couple of weeks.
I'm breathless with anticipation.
Very good. More puns to come from Darren next time. But until that time comes...
Because it's such a light episode.
Oh, yeah. Where can we find you online until then?
You can find me blogging at themovieblog.com, where I do a bunch of pop culture commentary, episode reviews. I'm doing the Star Trek franchise. I've done the X-Files franchise. You also find me on Twitter at Darren_Mooney. So if you take offense to anything that I've said in this podcast or whatever, or even if you just want to hit me up, you can hit me up there.
Oh, you must do so. Definitely read the Irish Movie Box. It's absolutely brilliant. I really mean that when I say it as well. It's so good. Especially the X-Files reviews you do in depth, which I will be posting as we do these episodes alongside so people can see them because they are absolutely brilliant. So you must check those out, guys. But yeah, we'll be back next week. Obviously, before then, you can find us on Twitter at the X_cast. Find us at Facebook, where we've got a great little community continuing to grow on there. And just type in the Xcast, and you'll find us there with lots of things going on. And you can email us at the xfcast@gmail.com. Do get involved and talk about the X-Files with us. But also, do add us on iTunes. Because that'd be great if you subscribe on iTunes, and if you could leave us a review and a rating, that'd be brilliant because it does help us massively. So
if you love it, tell your friends. If you don't like it, don't tell anybody.
Hey, there you go. Perfect. That should be the tagline. I might change the tagline.
Honesty in advertising.
Perfect. We'll be back next week then for 3 as Mulder's descent into darkness continues. Once again, a big thanks, Darren, for coming on.
My pleasure.
And remember, guys, until next time, deny everything.